So in 2020, I was watching CNN. I had been watching CNN for 10 years. I was a Democrat at the time, and I noticed a couple things that I knew were wrong, factually wrong when I was watching CNN, and I was kind of, a little bit taken aback.
Because it's cozy to kind of just hear your own side and your own views parroted back.
We like news stories that make us go, yeah, yeah, that verify what we already believe, as opposed to examining our beliefs, because that makes us uncomfortable. And if you're uncomfortable, you tend to change channels, and if you change channels, they don't sell their products.
They were talking about, the pandemic was going on, and they were talking about ivermectin on CNN as a veterinary drug. And I knew that was wrong because my daughter had been prescribed ivermectin. So I remember taking her to the ER and getting a prescription for ivermectin, and I knew she wasn't a horse.
So one way we can efficiently get access to all relevant facts and views with one stop is to choose media sources that still practice the fairness doctrine in presenting all sides of an issue.
It's the Associated Press that drives me nuts. I finally dropped my subscription to their to the style book because there's some stuff like how to punctuate and how do you use titles and all that stuff that's just basic technical stuff, but it has gone so far from where it started out and just being a technical guide to actually saying don't use the word riots because that will prejudice the article. The Associated Press is a really, it's now rated on the media bias charts. It's rated as left of center. It establishes what I would define as the mainstream media.
So I remember thinking, okay, CNN is saying something completely factually wrong here. And then I saw that that CNN reporter standing in front of like a big explosion saying that the rioting in that city was mostly peaceful. And he was literally standing in front of a big explosion, fire, and it didn't look peaceful at all. And so for the first time ever, out of curiosity, since I had heard two different things on CNN that didn't seem factual to me, or I knew weren't factual, I switched over to Fox for the first time. I had never watched Fox, but I was just curious.
I literally stopped watching and reading those things that did not appear to be factual and that appeared to be overly biased. And it has really changed my viewing habits.
Okay, so another, for instance, during the pandemic, if you watched mainstream media or CNN or liberal media, you would think that there was a consensus on the vaccine and the safety of it, and you would think there was a consensus on the response to the pandemic. You would think there was a consensus on the lockdowns and consensus on school closures, consensus on what we needed to do with children, consensus on mask mandates on children, and if you watched Fox, you would have seen doctors from Harvard and Stanford and many other the most reputable medical schools, absolutely, completely against what the government was doing with their reasons why, which were very reasoned.
Literally, there have been studies done that show that when you hear things that you really like, that you agree with, you just get like a dopamine rush, like taking a drug. So, and that's why we're so addicted to those sites that we really agree with. When we don't agree with it, we then, the fight and flight response actually happens in the brain. So there are a lot of physiological consequences of media bubbles and then stepping outside of the media bubbles that drive us to do, what it is that we do.
People have to learn to make decisions based on good factual information, not disinformation. And I think that's one of the major problems that we're having right now.
And even a new recent thing by Walter Cronkite School showed journalists have changed from being objective, investigative reporters that everyone thinks they are to now reflecting their lived experience and leaving neutrality behind and pushing solidarity as a commitment to social justice. So this is not reporting, but that's what's actually reflected in by the way, New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, and even AP.
The Fox News, CNN, and other media companies are providing polarized reporting because we, the people of USA, demand this type of reporting by supporting them. We pay for it. That includes social media. Social media makes money based on number of clicks. Many of our children, including our children, grandchildren, they're addicted to social media and they click on it. They support the media, okay? Today's media companies are providing the two polarized Americans we are looking for, what we're looking for. They're providing what we're looking for. We, the Americans, are culturally divided into two groups, left-leaning blues and right-leaning reds. Each group is gravitating to each bubble that provides the stories that match their cultural narrative. As a result, we have two echo chambers who are only catering to their audience, okay?
You know, the fairness doctrine came out of this recognition that, you know, the airwaves are owned by the public and broadcasters merely have a permission, our permission, the public's permission to control the airwaves. And so the idea was that we have a right to hear all sides of an issue from these broadcasters. And I would say, you know, that I think the reason I advocate for some, not necessarily the formulation of it that it was before, I don't know, but the reason I I feel kind of strongly about getting to some sort of media that still practices that is because I think it's easier when you have parties that are right next to each other on the same show and, you know, of different views. It's much harder to either tell a lie or to skew the truth when the other is right there. We see this here right in our own River Angels, right? If we're right here with each other, we can, you know, respectfully call each other on a misinformation.